It's midnight in rural Louisiana. The world outside is hushed, draped in a thick, heavy blanket of southern humidity. The moon hangs low over swaying cypress trees, casting long, silver shadows across the patchwork of fields and silent bayous. Against this deep darkness, the glow of a small, rural hospital seems almost defiant. Its corridors are alive, but with a subdued, persistent energy, the unique rhythm of life after the sun goes down. Here, every echoing footstep, every soft beep of a heart monitor, every hushed conversation tells a story, stitched together in the quiet hours of the night. Inside, the hospital takes on an almost otherworldly atmosphere. The day's frantic pace has faded, replaced by the soft hum of machines and the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. The staff move with a quiet purpose, a silent understanding shared among the night crew. They are the keepers of secrets and silent battles, tending to emergencies and private fears while the rest of the world sleeps. The air itself is a mixture of medicinal antiseptic and the faint, sweet scent of magnolias drifting through the windows, mingling with the distant chorus of frogs and cicadas. This is a place of deep contrasts, of modern medicine practiced in a land steeped in ancient folklore and tradition. But in this particular hospital, an institution with a history stretching back decades, the normal quiet of the midnight hour was about to be broken, not by a sudden medical urgency, but by something far more unsettling, something that seemed to crawl from the very bones of the building itself, a phenomenon that would begin as a faint whisper and grow into a chilling chorus, forever changing the lives of those who heard it and turning the sterile, safe corridors into a place of profound dread. The hospital, once a beacon of hope, was about to become the heart of a story that blurred the line between reality and nightmare.
It began subtly, dismissed as the product of feverish minds or the side effects of medication. The first report came from an elderly fisherman, Mr. Boudreau, recovering from a severe infection in room 204. He was a man of few words, his face weathered by a lifetime on the bayou, coming from the air conditioning vent above his bed. It wasn't just a noise, it was a word, a number. It was his bed number, 204. The nurse calmed him, adjusted his medication, and made a note in his chart, auditory hallucination. A few nights later, it happened again. This time, it was a young woman named Sarah in room 312, recovering from a routine appendectomy. She was sharp, lucid, and terrified. She described the same phenomenon, a rasping, inhuman voice whispering her bed number from the vent. It was so clear, she said, it felt as if someone was speaking directly into her ear. She refused to sleep with the lights off. The staff began to murmur among themselves. 2 incidents were a coincidence, but a pattern was beginning to form. Soon, the whispers became a quiet epidemic. A patient in the cardiac wing heard 117. A man in post-op heard 405. The descriptions were unnervingly consistent. The voice was never conversational. It was always a single, disembodied utterance of the patient's bed number, and every person who heard it described the tone in the same chilling terms: demonic, metallic, like grinding stone. It was a voice that seemed to carry an ancient malice. The initial explanations, faulty intercoms, pranks, mass hysteria, began to wear thin. The fear was no longer confined to the patients. It was seeping into the staff, a cold dread that lingered long after their shifts ended. As whispers of the vent voices spread through the hospital, the staff found themselves caught between professional duty and primal fear. The initial response was one of measured skepticism. Seasoned nurses who had seen and heard nearly everything tried to rationalize the events. They checked the intercom systems, which were functioning perfectly. They searched for hidden speakers or prank devices, finding nothing. They spoke to one another in hushed tones at the nursing station, theorizing that the building's old ventilation system was simply carrying sounds from other rooms in a distorted way. But this skepticism soon eroded, replaced by a creeping anxiety. The reports were too numerous, too consistent. The fear in the patient's eyes was too real. An unspoken rule began to form among the night crew. You didn't talk about it with day shift staff for fear of being ridiculed. You didn't mention it to new hires to avoid scaring them away. And you did your best to reassure patients, even as your own heart hammered in your chest. Nurses began walking their rounds in pairs, finding excuses to check on patients together. The break room, once a place of lighthearted chatter, became a sanctuary where exhausted staff would trade stories, their voices low, their eyes scanning the vents on the ceiling. The fear was palpable. Some nurses reported hearing faint whispers themselves while walking down empty corridors. Others felt sudden, inexplicable cold spots or the unnerving sensation of being watched. One janitor, a man who had worked at the hospital for over 20 years, swore he heard a low chuckle coming from a vent in an empty storage closet and refused to clean that floor alone ever again. The hospital at midnight was no longer just a place of healing. It had become a place of waiting, of listening. Every hum of the air conditioner, every rattle of the ductwork sent a shiver of dread through the halls as the staff braced for the next inevitable, terrifying whisper. Faced with growing panic among both patients and staff, the hospital administration was forced to act. They brought in engineers to conduct a thorough investigation of the building's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. The explanation they offered was grounded in science. They explained that large, interconnected metal ducts can act like a massive, primitive telephone network. Sound, especially low-frequency sound, can travel surprising distances through these channels, becoming distorted and amplified along the way. A conversation in the basement, they suggested, could surface as a fragmented whisper 3 floors up. They also pointed to a well-known psychological phenomenon, auditory pareidolia. This is the brain's tendency to interpret random noise as a familiar pattern, like hearing a voice in the static of a radio or the rush of the wind. In a high-stress environment like a hospital, where patients are often anxious, in pain, or on powerful medications, the mind is especially susceptible to such tricks. The hum of the ventilation system, they concluded, was likely being misinterpreted by suggestible patients as coherent speech. It was a neat, tidy explanation designed to restore order and calm. But for those who had heard the voices, this scientific explanation felt hollow. It didn't account for the chilling specificity of the phenomenon. How could random noise consistently form the exact bed numbers of dozens of different patients? How could so many people, isolated from one another, describe the voice with the same terrifying detail, its guttural, non-human quality? The engineers found no crossed wires, no faulty equipment, no source of any sound that could be responsible. The ducts were clear. The system was functioning normally. The investigation officially closed, but the mystery only deepened. The voices defied a simple, rational answer, leaving a void that was quickly filled by a more supernatural and far more terrifying possibility. The voices eventually faded, as mysteriously as they had begun. One week, the halls were filled with fear. The next, an unnerving silence settled back into the vents. But the absence of the sound did not erase its memory. A lingering shadow remained over the hospital, a story that became a permanent part of its identity. For the patients who had heard their bed numbers called by that unearthly voice, the psychological scars ran deep. Many developed a lasting fear of hospitals, of being alone at night, or of the simple sound of an air conditioner kicking on. Their trauma was a quiet, private burden, an experience they could rarely share for fear of disbelief or ridicule. The impact on the community was more subtle, but just as enduring. The story escaped the hospital walls, becoming a piece of local folklore. It was whispered in diners and on fishing docks, a chilling tale that blurred the line between a real event and a ghost story. The hospital, once just a place for medical care, acquired a new, darker reputation.
Some people began requesting rooms on lower floors, away from the vents, or asking to be transferred to other facilities. The legend of the demonic voices became woven into the fabric of the town's history. For the staff who lived through it, the memory became a defining part of their careers. They were bound by a shared secret, a collective experience that no one on the outside could truly understand. New nurses hired years later would hear the story from the veterans, told as both a warning and a testament. The silence that followed was, in its own way, more unsettling than the noise had been.
Every quiet night, every soft hum from the vents served as a constant reminder of the time when something inexplicable had reached out from the darkness and called the patients by number, one by one. The building held its peace, but the question would forever linger in its silent, watchful corridors. What was it that had spoken? And would it ever speak again?